were turning our homes into a microwave oven, I did become electrosensitive. Essentially, this persistent inflammation in your body that manifests in you becoming really sensitive, getting a headache, brain fog. My performance was suffering, and being up all night under these fluorescent lights and having a pager and a cell phone on my body in a high stress working environment. It wasn't good for me. It wasn't good for my family. I got away from some of that and started to do better. I started to heal. And I don't consider myself electrosensitive today. Like, I believe I have fully recovered. And the biggest piece of that was actually embracing natural EMFs.
We have been given the scientific knowledge, the technical ability, and the materials to pursue the exploration of the universe. To ignore these great resources would be a corruption of a God-given ability.
Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Stefan Burns Live number 7, and today I'm joined by Shane Reilly with Optimal Dwelling Spaces, and he is an EMF specialist based in Oregon and Washington. You can consult with him through his website, optimaldwellingspaces.com. And Shane, thank you so much for joining the podcast to talk about EMFs, health and wellness, and the interaction between these electromagnetic forces and our body, our mind, our consciousness.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really excited. I think there's a ton of crossover between our two worlds, if you will. So it's great to be here and looking forward to it.
Yeah, one quick note for anyone that's new to the channel is I went to school for geology. I have a Bachelor of Science in Geology. Then I worked as a geophysicist before I started to really broaden my knowledge in terms of geophysical energies across the planet and how they interact with us biologically, bioelectrically, which led me to this whole new realm of physics, biophysics, that is still very much being researched into and discovered. And so it's, I think, a really great combination to have me with the geophysics background and also a lot of health and wellness practitioning experience. And then also you, because you are a certified EMF specialist. What specifically are your certifications?
So it's through the Building Biology Institute, which is based in North Carolina. And they do a handful of different certifications. Right now, I am specialized in what's called an EMRS, Electromagnetic Radiation Specialist.
So at the end of the certification process, were you able to start seeing these invisible wavelengths of light?
You can definitely start to visualize them when you understand systems and, the data on a meter, and you can kind of tell where things are coming from. And yeah, I think if your mind bends that way, you can sort of start to put a 3D visible on the invisible.
Well, it's interesting because I had that experience too with utility locating. When I first started off as a geophysicist, I did a lot of utility locating because that's where just the money was at times for the company. So what you do with that, very simply, is you put a small electric current, direct current, on a gas line, water line, whatever. It has to be steel or a tracer wire, copper wire attached to a PVC pipe. And you choose like an 8 hertz signal, or you can choose any of these different frequencies. Depends on which one for the length and the size. And then you get your receiver, has 2 different receivers, and you locate that magnetic field. And there's passive settings, there's active settings, and we had all these different instruments. This is well before I was into any of this stuff, but it's so foundational. It's really interesting how that was a part of my career before I got into this. And I did start to get a sense of these magnetic fields and like how a normal, let's say, boulevard is set up down in the city, in the neighborhood. And it's just riddled with these pipes and these utilities. A lot of them are electrical lines, like optic fiber. And then there's also just a steel water line will carry electromagnetic signals that's induced with. So whether they're underground or above ground, I mean, our world is teeming with these energies that we don't see. We see visible light in a very specific range, but I mean, the light spectrum goes all the way from 0 to infinity hertz. Invisible light is in that very narrow nanometer range. So, um,
Yeah.
how did you like? What did they focus on with electromagnetic fields and the physics of it with your education? Like, what got you into this in the first place? Like, I have my geophysics background and some other things, but what we arrived to the same place. So, how did you get here?
Yeah. Yeah. Life's funny that way sometimes, but I used to be in the sales world. I used to be a totally different guy, wearing a suit, all that stuff.
Mm,
Then I caught the firefighting bug, and I decided to get into that, young and healthy, eating super clean. That's when paleo was kind of coming up, and
mhm.
we were working out all the time, and I was just like, yes, I'm doing it. This is great. I love this. And then I started not doing so well, and it was really baffling based on all the things I just described. It's like, why do I have this brain fog? Why can't I sleep? Why do I have these aches and pains?
Mm.
And it got bad enough, and we can jump more into this later, but I had to leave that world, which was just heartbreaking. It had taken so much work to get in. I started to learn a little bit about EMFs, noticed how they were in that environment, and some things clicked into place. Then my mom got a brain tumor not long after that. Thought about her lifestyle, her relationship with technology, and more things clicked. And at that point, it was like, okay, we're doing something about this, because nobody knows. Is aware. This stuff is invisible, right? So
Yeah.
I found the Building Biology Institute, and that was 6-7 years ago.
Well, I watched your interview talking about your story. I'll put a link to that in the video description as well. I didn't know you didn't. Maybe you mentioned it. At least I wasn't aware that it was a brain tumor that your mom had, and I mentioned that because that is of all the things that EMFs have been tied to, cell phone use, phone against the head, and brain tumors is where the strongest evidence lies, and that makes the most sense because you have this device that emits high-powered electromagnetic microwaves because they have to reach the cell tower. It's much easier for a cell tower to reach a cell phone. And then, of course, you're putting it right next to your head, so it's blasting at the highest strength right through your sensitive tissue. There's
Yeah.
magnetosomes in there and neurons and
Yeah.
all these
Yeah.
things.
Yeah. My mom's
So,
tumor was on the same side of her head that she held the phone to. And yeah, this is one of the canaries in the coal mine, so to speak, that we have now, is seeing glioblastoma and other kinds of brain tumors increase in the last, 20 years. Cell phones, early 90s, but they got really more high power and high power and high power. And then we see this increase. There's a little bit of a latency period, and then we see this increase in brain tumors. So it's really concerning, and at younger ages too. Like my mom was 73. Okay, she was kind of old, but we're seeing an increase in younger age groups too with these brain tumors that really have no business being there. So it's a big alarm bell.
well, what I want to also quickly highlight is glioblastoma would be the glial cells in the brain. And a blastoma is very interesting because it's actually what forms during regeneration. If you were to take a salamander or a frog, cut off their leg, a blastoma forms on the stump. It's this massive, undifferentiated cells. And then the electromagnetic signals that are running through the body, the different like voltage gradients, are what inform those cells to take on specific functions. Is it muscle? Is it connective tissue? Is it bone? If it's like near a sensitive organ or something, it can even turn into that. It's, the field of morphogenetics is really interesting, but that is governed by changing electromagnetic signals. They've done a bunch of research on this. And so to have a blastoma form in the brain on the side of the cell phone is showing these changing electromagnetic potentials, and effectively the cells dysregulated start to mutate a lot. That's how this, at the end of the day, that's how this works.
Hmm.
And so there's a lot of science over here, and there's a lot of science here and here, but people like haven't linked them together yet in their minds, even though it's not like you're even jumping that far. It's just like a nice stroll from one to the next, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, this, I think it's important to underscore here that the ways in which we're using these electromagnetic frequencies, which, it's the cell phone uses a certain part of the spectrum that it's always been there. That radiation has been present, but the coherence and the strength that we have given to these is absolutely wreaking havoc on our bodies, which, as you pointed out, from Becker's work,
Yeah.
putting a certain DC current through a salamander at the right points, if you cut their tail off, you can make it grow back, and they'll do that on their own. And all of these fields, from a cell phone, from a power line, alternating current, and just different constructions and deployments of the radiation, is totally interfering inside our body, and is just noise. And our body, our different systems, can't hear the true signal, that's been there. So it's not good. It's a big problem.
Yeah, we have our own electromagnetic fields we generate. Our heart is the strongest. It's really a guiding, organizing field for our body, our brain, our tissues, because it creates and influences these cellular voltage gradients, these potentials. Then our brain waves, our autonomic nervous system, spinal cord, all these things. I want to rewind very quick and just basically outline what electromagnetism is, light energy, and force. Can you go into that a little bit more? Like, when we talk about energy and these voltage gradients, like, there's a lot of jargon right now, and you need to understand some of these terms to really fundamentally understand this stuff and for that to click. But what really is it that we're talking about when we talk about light energy, waves, frequency?
Yeah, I when I distill it down, I give a lot of talks to different groups around to try and raise awareness. And I think the simplest way you can say it is it's an EMF. It's just one form or another, one jacket or another that energy puts on to go from point A to point B in the universe. And it has different characteristics, right? The frequency, the number of waves per second, the distance between the waves, the wavelength, amplitude, how much, above the null line and below the null line they go. And they just have all of these different collaborations of those different components, everything from, super low stuff down like Schumann resonance neighborhood, up into microwaves, radio frequency, and then we've got light, and then you get into like cosmic gamma radiation with really high frequency rates. There's just a huge, almost infinite variety of how energy goes from point A to point B. And we've taken just chunks, to use for our devices, and we've made them, like I said, so coherent, so different from what's found in nature. And they've only been around, since 1890, when the light bulb and the AC electric motor were introduced at the World's Fair. And then even really in the last 30 years, we have turned the dial to 11, so to speak, right? Way up. So I don't know if you want me to get more into that, but let's
eventually. Yeah. What do you mean by coherent for the viewers?
Coherence is like essentially how focused the radiation is, how strong it is. You look at a fire and it's giving off electromagnetic radiation, light, heat, infrared, but it's kind of random and lazy. It's dancing around, right? It's really beautiful to watch. It's soothing. That's not very coherent relatively. The signal that, your cell phone sends out to send your text message to the tower onto the person, it has to be extremely focused in a tight range, high power, so that it can do that job, because there's just a soup of other, man-made electromagnetic stuff out. So it has to be able to get through that. That's really how I think of coherence.
And an interesting and important aspect that's related to coherence is also attenuation. Like a visualization for people is you have a flashlight And the stronger flashlight will have a beam that goes farther at night. But if you have a laser light, all those photons are vibrating exactly in phase with each other. So it can travel and go way out there. And that's why it's dangerous. You point a laser light at a helicopter or something, you don't want to do that because it will reach all the way to the helicopter and be very, very bright still. And it goes in line with this idea of attenuation, whereas these photons, these light particles, this wave in general, will just slowly dissipate out. And the higher frequency waves will dissipate out faster. And a lower frequency wave will not attenuate as quickly, it can travel further. And that's why you need less 2G towers than you need 3G. You need less 3G towers than 4G because it has a lower frequency wavelength. And so people may be wondering, why are these 5G towers everywhere, like literally on every block? It's because it's a higher frequency and therefore it attenuates out faster. They need to pump more energy into those to cover a smaller radius. And the reason why they do that is because it's a higher frequency, it can carry more information in its waveform. But that's why you see 4G towers, not that often. It's like every hillside or something. But the 5G ones, if you live in a place with them, it's like every couple of blocks you see them, and they're smaller. They don't need to be as large. You talked about the increase in the past 30 years. That's a big change just in the past, not even 3 years that we're seeing.
Yep. The attenuation is different with these higher frequencies, kind of like you were saying. So even on a foggy day or a rainy day, they knew designing these systems that the signal wasn't going to go very far from a millimeter wave high band 5G. And so, they're talking about hundreds of thousands of new antennas, and you've probably seen them. They're already here, definitely. Closer to your homes, your businesses, parks, green spaces, particularly in high population areas. But yeah, they're putting them in all over the place, just blocks apart in some cases.
An interesting thing about mentioning the fog and the rain, that when it's foggy or rainy, the conductivity of the atmosphere increases, and the more conductive a medium, the easier it allows these electric currents to flow through it, the more it can absorb magnetic energy. It's when something is not conductive that magnetic fields can pass through it very easily. For example, you have a plastic case on your phone that doesn't impede the signal at all. But with the iPhone 4, when you put your hand on the antenna, they built the antenna into the side of the phone. That created all these problems. If people remember the iPhone 4, it was like hand gate. That's why people, it's even funny to think about how people at the top of their game, Apple, right? They should know this stuff better than anyone. That's a pretty basic mistake to make, and they made it. They didn't think that through. So the point I'm getting to is that even when it's not foggy or rainy, the atmosphere normally isn't that conductive, but the more this energy you're pumping into the atmosphere, the more you're increasing its conductivity in general. For people that want to research in this specifically, it's called like the Carnegie curve. And the conductivity of the atmosphere that we live in also interacts with us biologically. So that's another mechanism at play of interacting, how these electromagnetic energies interact with us. But that is normally governed through something called the global electric circuit. But in this case, we're changing it locally in our locations, towns and cities, with all this electromagnetic energy that we're pumping into the atmosphere. And the higher frequency these waves go, the more they pulse per second, the larger this effect is going to be. So what are some like the worst sources of electromagnetic fields that people will encounter? Let's say in the city and the town.
Yeah, it's wireless. It is wireless. So Wi-Fi, cellular, Bluetooth, all of this smart tech, your smart fridge, smart electric meter on the side of the house.
I heard those are really noisy.
A smart baby monitor. Yeah, it's just all in this microwave section. And like I have a chart that I show sometimes of the frequency allocations for the United States, and it is just packed. It's like a crazy rainbow chart. There must be 1,000 different bands in there or more, for medical, for government, for military, for consumer. So in the city, you are surrounded by so many people. They all have multiple devices now, AirPods, smartwatch, smartphone. They've got Wi-Fi router, Wi-Fi access points, smart TVs, all kinds of smart, quote unquote, we'll do quotes on that because
Smart.
I don't think it's very smart. But we are awash in a soup of wireless radiation, and it is absolutely, it's like, okay, when you cook something in the microwave, if you use a microwave,
No.
and you don't wrap it in like a wet paper towel, it comes out tasting like cardboard or shoe leather or something, right? It's dehydrated. And these are the same frequencies that are in our tech. And so it's dehydrating us at a cellular level. So I go into homes when I work with clients, and I can find 15, 20 wireless devices, without even really trying. There's just so much. It's being incorporated into the new tech, the washers and dryers. Anytime you replace something now, if you're concerned about this, you need to do some due diligence, dig into the paperwork, look at the marketing and the packaging, because it's probably going to have smart features on it. And that is not good. And our homes are just being filled up with wireless around the clock too, right? Like in building biology, when we're talking about reducing EMF in someone's home and their personal exposure, sleep is a key time to allow your body to not have that interference from the environment, to be able to run its regenerative processes, autophagy, apoptosis, proper melatonin signaling. Your brain is doing a ton of housekeeping when you sleep. And people have their cell phone on their nightstand, they leave the Wi-Fi router on all night. It's like we don't go to the kitchen sink and just have the faucet constantly running, right? You put your glass there, you fill it up, you turn it off. But with this tech, we're just giving it free rein in our homes. We're turning our homes into a microwave oven. And it's one thing if you're out in the suburbs or the country, but if you're in the city and you're in multi-unit housing, take all of your stuff and multiply it by, how many people are within a couple 100 feet of you, how many units, probably a dozen, maybe more. And they've all got the same stuff because everybody has bit in on the convenience and how nice this is and the cool things it does, but they don't understand the dark side, the downside, and how it's harming us. So it really is, wireless is the biggest piece. And there's some others, but wireless is the starting point.
So wireless is the starting point because of the higher frequencies, which they have shown to interact with us at the cellular level, at the molecular level, by being able to stimulate charge carriers, and they can cause DNA strand breaks, single or double. What that means is a single strand break, one part of the DNA breaks, the cell can repair that. Double strand break triggers cellular death. So you have these happening at some probability, and the probability goes up the more of these energies are in the environment. And the frequency band, that microwave frequency band, triggers those faster than the lower frequencies like the power grid. Power grid in North America runs at 60 hertz, in Europe at 50 hertz. I guess one of the benefits of I'm in Moldova right now. One of the benefits, I guess, would be that, nothing is smart here in this apartment. To light the oven, I had to hold like this button down for like a minute to get the gas flowing. Then use a lighter, like exploded in my face. I'm like, I'd take this though over a smart oven any day.
Yes,
it works.
That's right. Let's talk about one point there you hit on. So yes, strand breaks in DNA, your body has repair mechanisms, right? So the key point here is, like, Stefan, when you and I came out of our mamas, we weren't immersed in this much wireless tech.
Yeah, I was thinking about this today.
It took a while, right? We didn't come out and, there was no concern about a digital pacifier giving your kid an iPhone at the restaurant. But now our kids have a much longer amount of time where they are growing up with this in the environment. The more DNA breaks you have, the more stress on your body, and we're speaking very generally here, right? But the more chances that happens in your life, the more chances that you miss that repair process somewhere, that cancer starts. And these kids are getting it from a young age, and chances are cancer is going to go up in these current and next generations because of this.
Quite dramatically. It's almost, maybe it'll even be like X-Men. It's crazy, like kind of how all these human mutations started, but that's on top of like all the pesticides in the environment and the fake food and all the different chemicals are added. And what's in the water isn't good. It creates free radical compounds in the body. Yeah, it's when you start diving into this stuff, it's really empowering because you learn how it works to the best of your knowledge, but then you also see how it's very it's a very delicate but also a very robust system. And I think one reason why it hasn't been like this immediate collapse is because we have been able to stress ourselves quite a lot, but we are seeing cracks form now. And yeah, we do see these instances of I think was it childhood leukemia is one of the most well-studied effects that occurs from power grid exposure, which is the 50 and the 60 hertz, sometimes like a 17 hertz, like train lines and some higher frequencies. Yeah. So, that's troubling because with the microwave and cellular signals and smart stuff, it's like a death by 1,000 cuts because of what you talked about. Everyone has them. There's so many. They're everywhere. They have to put out very large signals to reach those central stations like a cell tower. But they do attenuate pretty quickly. With certain measures, you can block those signals. And we're going to get into that. It's really important. I want to leave people with something that they can do to improve the situation. But the power grid at 50 and 60 hertz is millions of times less in its cycle rate because it's hertz, not megahertz. It goes hertz to kilohertz to megahertz, and now 5G's in the gigahertz range. And so that's kind of like how big of an issue is just our energy grid as it relates to this, and what are some things to be aware of in regards to that?
Yeah, it's a huge one too. It's very well researched. That part of the spectrum was used before the microwaves and RF, so there's a ton of research on it. This goes back to Russia was studying electromagnetic impact on the body in the 1930s. NASA got this document from them and translated it, and it shows this low frequency stuff, mainly dozens and dozens of body systems and dozens of effects that they noted in their research. So this is not new, right? It's just kind of been buried because it's bad for business. But the 60 hertz stuff that power our homes is a big deal as well. It's the other side of the coin. We've got the RF, the wireless. And that's really, the lower stuff, the 60 hertz stuff, we see a distinct, and you showed it in one of your videos, the distinct magnetic and electric component of the wave, right? So that's what we're talking about. When it gets up higher to microwave, it becomes more indistinguishable. But 60 hertz brings with it a distinct magnetic field and a distinct electric field. And every power line outside, even underground power line delivery, every wire in your home that has electricity on it, current flows on that wire. And as a result, there's this radiated magnetic field and electric field that comes off of it. And this is an alternating current system in North America. And our bodies have a DC, a direct current. So it is essentially in opposition to our body and our processes and what it's trying to do to maintain health, to survive, to thrive. And back in the 70s, childhood leukemia was a big deal. And there were some journalists and some researchers who were calling it out. I think it was in Denver that they studied, some of the epidemiologists studied and found a cancer cluster around some high tension lines, leukemia in kids. And it was going and getting more prominence and more awareness, and the government was starting to do something about it. And then the industry, the power industry, essentially, did what they could to shut it down, to buy their own science, to defer the argument, to not engage. The International Agency on the Research of Cancer classified it, as a probable carcinogen. So this has been around, right? And you can read Andrew Marino's book, Going Somewhere, on he's a lawyer and a physicist who worked with Robert Becker, Robert O. Becker, and he details some of the court cases he was involved in where different cities or like a farmer was coming against the utility for the damage being done from their power lines. It's really fascinating the way science is sort of played and manipulated, right? And the truth is hidden. So yeah, 60 hertz is a big one. There's just so much we could dive into there in a home. But part of what I do is to check the electrical system to ensure things are balanced. We look at ways to eliminate any current flow in the bedroom circuits at night. There's just a lot of things that you can do. If you have overhead power lines, you definitely want to take some action and get some data, get a basic meter and do some reads on that, or have a professional come out. Because this one, it also has very deep research on damage to various body systems, including cancer, right? So it's something to be digging into and looking into.
I'll put a link to that book, Going Somewhere, in the video description. And just to quickly kind of add a little bit of perspective for people, when we're talking about electromagnetism, we're talking about a fundamental force of nature. And it's like gravity in many ways. Gravity is this attractive force. And so the larger the mass, the more pulls more mass towards it. Electromagnetism is slightly different, but it's still this field of potential, this field of energy. And so the more energy is in an electromagnetic spot, the greater potential is, then the more energy there is to potentially stimulate something. So you could think of it like if you have a wall that is 2 feet tall and you put a rock on it, push the rock off, it'll fall and hit the ground with some force. But if the wall is 20 feet tall and you push that rock, it's going to hit the ground with a lot more force because it's had a higher potential energy, had more time to accelerate and hit the ground from gravity. That's gravity's potential energy. Electromagnetism is nearly the same. And so what we've done in many ways is just alter the electromagnetic potentials, and in these specific frequency bands, whether it's in the megahertz or specifically at 50 hertz or specifically at 60, wherever you are on the planet, we've changed the potential energies to be much, much, much higher. And what's really interesting about the power grid is that these frequencies are the same that interact with us through things like ion cyclotron resonance, which have very specific frequencies that they occur at on the low end of the scale. based on Earth's magnetic field strength. So Earth has a static magnetic field of a certain strength, which doesn't really change. And those 50 and 60 hertz fields line up with that pretty nicely. Whereas it doesn't happen at 500 hertz. There's different mechanisms for these higher frequencies, 500 megahertz. But by just loading more potential energies into our environment, we load these potential energies into our body. And that can explain why we have these things like these strand breaks or protein function changes, or how a cell can have different activity or trigger stress response, because you are now stimulating the movement of things like ions and charge carriers and proteins in the body where normally there wouldn't be the energy to do that. And that's why poor sleep is such a good indicator. You may have a problem with electromagnetism in your home, or maybe you have electrosensitivity if you've been having poor sleep, because that's normally the body's quietest time. And so if you are having all these little reactions take place in your body that normally aren't because they're being stimulated by these artificial fields, then your sleep quality is going to go down. You're going to have, abnormal hormone production at times, but normally it's just mostly melatonin. Then you get that cortisol spike in the morning to wake you up. But that's the thing. It's such a deep field that it's in many ways like how do you comprehensively summarize this in a way that people are like, I understand, or at least they get a feel for what you're actually discussing. And it really boils down to energy. But in the house, you mentioned these energy flows. Now, they cross-wire. When they were wiring a house, you're going to be more of an expert than me in this. When they cross-wire a house, they do it to cancel out the fields. Is that right? That's the idea?
No, that's just a happy coincidence that is good for us. You're talking about on a circuit, you have a hot conductor, usually has a black jacket on it. And you have a white conductor, which is called the neutral, which is not neutral. Mm-hmm. It's a current carrying conductor. The black flows one way. The return is on the white. Now, as long as the current levels are the same, so each of these wires is current flows, we get a magnetic field. One rotates this way, the return rotates the opposite. So if they're close, they cancel out. There's no magnetic field. That's part of what we're looking for in a home. And if we have imbalance of current, we have a wiring error, we have some problem in the home, then we have to dig in and figure out where this current is dropping off, and bring it back into balance.
So when you walk through a home with your different meters, you're picking up all these different smart devices. They don't have this wiring that's normal in a house for the power grid. So while the power grid's a problem, it's measured globally. It's actually changing like the geophysics of our planet. Most homes do.
There's a third. There's a third Van Allen belt now from time to time, right? Have you seen that?
Yeah. Well, it's a whole. We're gonna have, I think, a few videos on this because we really need to dive into this because it's really so important for the world. And I found someone I could discuss this with at depth. But with the home, you have this crosswire, but with the phone, you don't have that. It's just not a thing. So that's one issue there. So when you're going through the home, you're finding all these devices. They're kind of changing location sometimes if it's a phone. But then sometimes you find a wiring mistake in the home, something like that. Yeah?
Yeah.
And that'll just bleed a cloud out.
It does constantly. Yeah. And magnetic field. So we talked a little bit about attenuation, how different frequencies in the microwave range, they don't travel, they don't penetrate as well. But low frequency stuff like a magnetic field from the wiring in your home, that will cut through every building material imaginable. Okay. It doesn't matter. Wood, sheetrock, brick, cinder block. It has to be, certain kinds of aluminum or steel at a certain thickness, which is extremely cost prohibitive, right? So that's one thing that people need to know is your wall will not save you from a magnetic field. It may block a little bit of the Wi-Fi, like coming from your neighbor, depending, but magnetic field, it's like the old meme, the honey badger, right? It does not give up. It just does what it wants. It cuts through, and it easily penetrates your body. And because it's oscillating, it's a totally different signal, and we're back on that train again. It's a different language into your body. It's you're listening to this beautiful symphony, and then this heavy metal band sets up right next door and plugs in and cranks it. It's totally different. It's chaotic. It's interference.
One thing that people will mention often is the difference between ionizing radiation and non-ionizing radiation. And it's always by people that have done just a cursory kind of like investigation into this. They found something, they're like, oh, I know enough now. And so it's true. So what ionizing radiation is, it's basically an energy wave or a light photon that is strong enough to break a molecular bond. And it can do it just that single photon. A gamma ray can, you're near a nuclear blast or something, and it will just break all the molecular bonds that are exposed. And of course, it's just such an overload to your body. You can't regenerate, you die. And then what's interesting is that we see visible light. And one of those mechanisms is that the retina is always kind of undergoing this healing process. But right above visible light is where you get ionizing radiation. You get a sunburn from ultraviolet light. And that's why, getting too much sun can give you cancer and things, because it's breaking these molecular bonds, these DNA strands too often. But what we've learned is that it's not just ionizing radiation, is that it's also stimulating the movement of these charge carriers through non-ionizing radiation. These photons that aren't necessarily strong enough to always break a molecular bond or the normal molecular bond. Sometimes they can trigger an electron to go from valence to conductance, and then all of a sudden create some sort of free radical, or they change the way a protein or an ion works, and then that triggers downstream cascades that can cause free radical activity and breaks and things. So it's a very nuanced picture. It's not just, oh, well, it's non-ionizing, so load me up. That's a very naive perspective that really requires, unfortunately, some education into like basic electromagnetism. Like, do you understand what Faraday's law is? And a magnetic field can induce an electric current. So that's how you can get a magnetic field triggering something like cancer, which is governed cellular. For example, this is really interesting. Mitosis, cellular mitosis is triggered when the cell potential on the membrane drops. So it goes to, normally it's like negative 50 millivolts, negative 80 millivolts for a neuron, which almost never undergoes mitosis. And when it goes to like 0 or so, it kind of neutrals out. All of a sudden, the cells start to divide rapidly. And what cancer is it stays at 0. Normally during regeneration or mitosis, it drops and then it goes back up to this lower reading. So I guess it reduces down to its negative 50 or 60. But when you have these magnetic fields coming in, creating these electric currents, changing these cellular voltage gradients, then it triggers cell behavior to be different, because DNA reads this information. This is the best understanding that we have. And then it says, okay, produce these proteins, do these actions, do these things. And so our natural environment does have these natural energy bands, like Schumann resonances, the extremely low frequency spectrum, but they're only picotesla strength. This is like 10 to the negative 9 nanotesla, or microvoltage strength for the electric field. And then, like a lightning storm passing overhead is a huge release of electromagnetic energy, but you're not living in a lightning storm every day 10,000 years ago. Now we're living in a artificial like energy storm every single second.
Hmm.
And it's just with a lightning storm, you get the flash of light and the thunder, right? You actually can see the light waves coming off. But with these devices, they're invisible. One interesting thing though is you can hear them. You can have do you have that experience of being able to hear sometimes a cell tower if you go to a very quiet environment? Have you ever experienced that?
Um, I don't think I have, but this is well documented. Alan Fry, first coined it decades ago, the microwave hearing.
Mm-hmm.
People were translating this, the shock wave, the electromagnetic shock wave is basically hits your ear circuitry and is translated into this sonic shock wave. This is what's going on with Havana syndrome right now.
Yeah.
These people being attacked. Um, I want to back up real quick. You hit on a great point, and this is important for people to know the ionizing versus non-ionizing. So
Mm-hmm.
ionizing, the ability that the energy can knock, an atom or an electron out of orbit, can actually physically break a DNA strand. That's what the industry has pounded the table with, the wireless industry, the military, the government, all the scientists for decades and decades. They said, there is no way that these EMFs can do that. So they're not a problem. And if you look it up today, you'll probably still see that. But I want to be clear, that has been debunked. Okay. EMF from a cell phone, from a power line, it is non-ionizing, yes. But there are thousands and thousands of studies showing that it still causes harm. So it's just totally ridiculous that that mantra from the industry is still out there. I mean, this is what the SAR testing for phones is based on.
Mm.
This weird gelatinous supersized head filled with some mystery fluid that's nothing like us. All they're looking at is, does it heat up past a certain point or not when the cell phone is, right here? And that's the ball doesn't stop there, right? It keeps rolling. There's so much more to the tale than just heating of tissue. So
Yeah.
be smart, do your homework, don't fall for that crap. Okay. It's not a valid point anymore.
Well, I can even add a little bit more to make it very abundantly clear for our listeners and watchers is that what is the word ionizing? You're creating an ion. What is an ion? ION. It is a charge carrier. It is either an electron, which has a very low mass, or a proton, which has a higher mass, 1800 times higher. It can be a calcium, Ca2 plus. It's lost its outer electrons. It can be magnesium, sodium, whatever, right? It's a ion. It is a little elemental particle that carries a charge. That's what an ion is. So ionizing radiation can break a bond or strip something of an electron so much so that it becomes an ion basically instantly. The moment that resonant interaction occurs, boom, you have an ion. And you have that electron fling off, or maybe you have a couple fling off, or whatever. But through these non-thermal mechanism, you can trigger the release of ions in the body. You can change how they flow and how they interact. So at the end of the day, you're still having changing ion flows, and that is at least half the mechanism at play. Ionizing radiation is more dangerous in the immediate short term because not only is it creating these ions, which then go on to have reactionary cascades, but it's also like directly breaking an important molecule, part of the cell membrane, DNA, whatever. But triggering these ion flows is also a big component of the problem here. So, I mean, that immediate, like, little injury, boo-boo, whatever you want to call it, from ionizing radiation, yeah, that's bad. You don't want to lay in the sun all day. That's why I'm constantly amazed by trees, because it is standing there all day, every day in the sun. It's really quite incredible. That's why they have chlorophyll. It, like, literally is their sunscreen. We could not do that. But over time, a non-ionizing radiation can have these these damaging effects. And our environment has always had these energies in terms of Schumann resonances. The entire electromagnetic spectrum is always in existence at some strength because there's various ways to make these waves. But we've just focused in, like you said, on very specific ones and turn them up to past 100. And yeah, that rock band is playing all the time. One thing that people often do to help with this, and I'm a big proponent of, I think you are too, is earthing and grounding.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm currently writing a book on that to go into this and really help people. And there's a difference between the two. Earthing, in my opinion, from my perspective, is like how to integrate with nature, like really immersing yourself in these natural energies, going to the forest bathing, let's say going to the ocean. It's more than just grounding, which is basically decharging your electric potential. So I'd like to talk about earthing and grounding, but a lot of people will use grounding products in the home. And being the EMF specialist, the building biologist, can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, this is a huge one. I think it's a big mistake for a lot of people. And you are, when using a ground mat, essentially plugging yourself into the electric grid circuit. Okay. And we've talked about how this circuit is kind of all around us, how alien it is to our physiology, to our bodies. And you are plugging yourself into it and giving any current on it a pathway through your body. Okay. You don't stick your finger in the electrical socket. Like, we know that. Some people know that a certain amount of current can stop your heart. Right. So current, and if you ask any electrician, current is what kills. The current flow through your body. Most people grounding have a huge misunderstanding on using a multimeter or a voltmeter with their grounding mat to test it, quote unquote, test it. So again, current kills, not voltage. But when we're testing a grounding mat with a voltmeter and we see 0, we think, hey, we're good. This is clean. I can totally ground on this. I'm connected to the earth. No problem at all. Okay, stop. Stop right there. Voltage on that meter, the number is just comparing wherever point A is to wherever point B is. It's going to show you if there's a difference in the voltage potential.
This
right?
potential energy we talked about. There's a lot of energy here.
Yes.
There's not so much there. How is it flowing in between? That is current. If it's resistive in between, it flows very slowly. If it's very conductive in between, it flows very quickly.
Yep. So all your meter is telling you is that you're at the same voltage potential from the mat to whatever you're got the other probe into, right? So it could be, I'm at 120 volts over here and I'm at 120 volts over there. It could be actually 0, depending on like if you're outside. But the voltage is not the whole story. That tells you a potential of what kind of current could flow in certain circumstances. You have to pay attention to voltage and current, and I would give more weight to current. And those are more expensive meters to measure that. So that aside, like, understand if you do this inside, you're connecting yourself to a circuit. And it's a circuit that is totally different from the configuration of your body's circuitry, right? It is completely different. Now, people think, well, I have this little plug. It only goes into the third prong on the receptacle on the wall, right? That's the grounding prong, right? So that's clean, right? I'm safe. No, just stop. If we open up your electrical panel, the way our system in North America is engineered, that grounding component touches the neutral, which, as I said before, carries current, a large amount of current. They connect at some point, right? So there is a pathway there. That's how the system is set up, right? For safety, generally, not for human health. They don't really care about that, except for fires and major stuff. But these micro effects, that's not why it's designed. So every home I go into, unless they have a $15,000 isolation transformer and have done extensive rewiring in the home, there is current on the grounding conductors that we are plugging grounding mats into. So again, you have just connected yourself to that current flow, right?
That was my personal experience when I first started using these. And if for anyone that perhaps is lost, a grounding sheet is usually a cotton sheet, these silver threads. I have a video on how you can do it yourself using a copper sheet, put a cotton sheet on top, and you get your own ground rod. Talk about that more in just a bit. It's the idea is that you have this conductive sheet that you discharge your built up energy from, and it flows out the ground system of the house into the earth, which has a lower electric potential than the house wiring and things of this nature, therefore discharging these energies and remediating a lot of these energies that hit you from the microwave range and smart devices and so on and so forth. But when I first bought a grounding sheet, I think what happens often with the beginning is people do notice an improvement in sleep because it does provide a very strong timing signal. And half of the whole thing is like, do you have coherent energy in your body or do you have non-coherent energy? If the energy is scattered and chaotic, it's difficult for these natural biologic rhythms to find their flow. You have light hit your eyeball and it sends a spike of cortisol, and so you get a very strong impulse. But if you have the blinds closed, you don't get that light signal. Body's like, hey, is it 3 a.m. or is it 9 a.m.? Is it 2 p.m.? Whatever. So these signals are very important in harmonizing our natural biologic rhythms. And so I think what happens, a lot of people, they plug in and now they have a very consistent, it's a perfectly consistent 60 hertz waveform or 50 hertz waveform, pulsing through their body. And so initially their body's like, oh, great, cool, signal we can harmonize to. But then those chronic effects build up and they start to outweigh the initial benefit of having something to kind of synchronize to, which most people don't have at the beginning. So that's the first problem. Their biorhythms are out of whack. They're not coherent. And then they're also building up this chronic stress and cellular damage from all these things. But that is kind of one reason why people feel an immediate positive effect in the first week or two. But I remember I was laying there and I could feel the vibration. It was really wild. And I was like, this doesn't feel good. That's what made me look into it more, because I was like, I feel wired off of this. I don't feel calm or relaxed. And so, I have even more evidence. Like when I was just camping in the Carpathians in Ukraine, there was one cell tower 3 mountain ridges away, and they had a Wi-Fi router farther away on camp, which you couldn't record. You couldn't pick it up on your phone where my tent was. So I was totally basically isolated from everything except one cell tower. And it would be completely quiet at night because there's no birds there for some reason. Maybe you hear a cow every now and then. Dead quiet on a night where there's no wind. And I get to hear the buzzing of ding, and it's always changing differently. It's not a consistent buzz. You can hear the data transmission in that cell tower signal. And so that is in a very quiet environment. And then I mean, put like 20, 30, 100, 1,000 of those together, you can't discern the individual signal like you can in a super pristine environment like the Carpathians in Ukraine. Um, but when you lay on a grounding mat, you may have that experience where you can feel that vibratory pulse if you're very relaxed and the noise in your system is very reduced.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where it's
interesting experiment. Yeah.
It was always personal experience that led me to the next like level of research. So that's kind of what took me further and further into this. But the other thing with the ground system is so it's connected to the neutral when you're having these currents flow. One argument would be, well, the current is always going to take the path of least resistance. Can you elaborate on that and why that's not exactly true? It's true, it's also not true.
It's a half-truth. Current will take any and all available paths is a better statement. And in a home wiring setup, there are multiple paths. I'm not saying the grounding conductor carries multiple amps of current. You know, it's sometimes like 1/10 of an amp that I see. It can be a little bit higher depending on the issues. But here's the thing.
For our listeners.
An amp? Well, you're the physics guy. You'd have to give the formula.
Well, to put it very simply, it's the strength of the current.
Sure. So yeah, it's a measure of how much energy is in that current, right? So here's the rub though. Obviously you wouldn't go put your hand on a wire carrying, you know, huge current, multiple amps. Like that would blow you out of the water right away. So these two, actually, they're industry groups, which is really interesting to me. The IEEE and the NIEHS, they have both done research on microamps of current. So fractions of 1 amp on a wire. And this is, you know, what's called contact current. Like if you touch your bathroom faucet, or if you touch the washing machine, which are both metal and conductive and possibly tie in at some point in your house to all of the other electrical, they have looked at 18 microamps of current and found links to cancer creation. So, you know, I'm measuring 1/10 of an amp on a grounding conductor. Let's say that you could plug your ground mat into. And I'm not going to do the math, but 18 microamps is magnitudes less than that.
I think it's 10 to the -6 for micro.
Yeah. So it's tiny, but it's because it's AC. It's oscillating. It's that foreign signal again, right? So some people do feel bad on a ground mat long term, definitely. But this effect, this cancer-linked effect, is so tiny, it's like sub-perceptual. You're not even going to notice this is going on. You would have to be super intuitive, super in tune with your body, you know, not having a lot of other noise in the environment like you just mentioned. But people are plugging themselves into this circuit and they're being, I guess it's like a micro electrocution, right? And so this can be from your grounding mat. This can be from touching your laptop case. This can be from touching the bathroom sink, like I said. So getting that out there, a lot of people would think, well, if I get a dedicated grounding rod, if I run a wire that doesn't touch anything but the mat over here and a metal rod and the earth over here, it's not touching my electrical system at all, that would be okay, right? Well, actually not. So in North America, 60 to 80% of our return current, remember in the home, we talked about the black wire and the white wire and current goes out here. So it's on a macro scale, it's the same thing between our homes and a utility substation. The current comes in on the wires. Have you ever noticed that you'll see like 3 power lines on the very top of the pole, and then about 6 feet under, you'll see one tiny little wire? So these are the HOTS, current flow. this is the neutral return, it can't support as much current as these big guys up top. So we actually return most of the power in North America through the soil.
Yeah.
So when you plug a rod into the earth directly into the soil to connect to your grounding mat, you're essentially having the same effect, right? And I'm not saying there's no benefits from grounding, right? There's a lot of good studies that show reduction in inflammation and other things. And we know about dissipation. We know about connecting to, the sun is the cathode, the earth is the anode. When those two hit, electrons are released. There's a infinite swimming pool of electrons in the earth, right, to tap into. So there is some benefit, but we really don't know. Like I do this all the time with clients. They have a fancy new infrared sauna, right?
Oh,
And they're like, hey, I the research says there's some therapeutic benefit here. And I'm like, well, my meat says you're at a significant exposure level for the power flowing through this. So it's how many steps forward are we getting? How many steps back is it taking us? What's the equation? And there's really not very good research on that yet. Like, how is the offset worth it for connecting to a grounding mat, right?
that's what I want people to walk away from this conversation with. One of the things is to have that mindset that could start to think about the positives and negatives, and how one thing may help, one thing may hurt. The ground rod, for example, it's difficult because some people are in a very bad state. So it's not easy for them, let's say, to just like bugger off and go swimming in the ocean, or taking a hike or going to the park barefoot.
Yep.
So the dedicated ground rod is better. But yeah, a lot of that energy would dissipate out into the soil too. But yeah, there is still that effect. And like with the normal ground system that people are plugging into, that ground rod is plugged in right next to the side of the house within this cloud of energy. And if we go to Faraday's law, where a magnetic field induces an electric current, you have all these magnetic fields in the environment. You have this huge antenna as the ground system for a building. So it's also being induced with currents through these eddy currents, is what they're called in geophysics. And so you're also connecting to those. And these microvolt currents have been shown to be biologically relevant because the body runs at that microvolt scale. The Schumann resonances, which are very important evolutionarily, biologically, they're microvolt in scale in the vertical electric field. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, increasing the amperage just kind of, it's a little different, but at the same time, it's kind of just increasing the rate of these natural reactions that with the natural fields, we've learned to utilize those energies. And there's probably still some sort of stressor response from that, like a big thunderstorm rolling through. But in many ways, the natural fair weather current, Schumann resonances, which are also alternating, we've learned to harness those energies for our biologic functions. That may be one reason why when astronauts go to space and the strength of Earth's magnetic field drops and the strength of Schumann resonances drop, all of a sudden their bone density crashes because they're not having proper calcium balance anymore. And they're like, oh, well, it's because there's no gravity, you need to work out. There's no force. Wolff's law definitely is an effect where if you put force on something, it strengthens, but they will then load themselves up and exercise like 2 hours a day. Does not really make that much of a difference. So it's very likely through these ion mechanisms. But you're picking up all these...
Sorry. Did you hear about the Kelly twins? The astronauts?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. Well, the Kelly twins were astronauts, and they did, I think they're twins.
Yeah, identical.
Identical twins, right? So they had one stay on Earth and one go up in the space station for, I don't know, some amount of time, some long tenure. And then they brought him back to Earth, and they measured various, physiological aspects. And the Kelly brother who was in space, his methylation profile was off the charts compared to his brother, right? So it was really telling. Yeah, you get out of the Earth's protective magnetic field, the Schumann resonance, the heartbeat of the earth. You're more exposed to cosmic radiation because you don't have that protection, and your body goes to crap. Right.
Yeah, it's funny because there's really good evidence for all this, and a lot of people have been I wouldn't even call them whistleblowers. They've just been doing their job for decades now. But like you look at a company like Apple, like any cell phone manufacturers, like no way they don't know that this stuff is, if you put it here for extended periods of time, it's not good for you. I keep it on airplane mode all the time. I'd like to talk about that a little bit too. But one of the things that really got this started was it was actually the military wanting to use certain frequency bands for like submarine communication. And they had a very strong lobbying effort than that, because more important than any of these companies is the military industrial complex. So if you really want to understand why this is all in many ways shrouded in this misinformation bubble, is because without these frequencies, our military strength and logistics and everything would be sent back to the 1800s. And that is not a sacrifice they're willing to make. So it's like, okay, well, we'll have the health of the human populace suffer, and we just won't even educate on this. So some people know, but if we can just live in ignorance, maybe it doesn't exist, that type of deal. So a lot of people just in that industry, whatever, they don't even know now. But yeah, it did hit that focal point in like the late 70s and the 80s. Again, that link to that book in the video description, folks.
You should also link to, I just read it yesterday. It's fantastic. So there's a journalist, Louis Slesson. He writes a website called Microwave News. And one of the early whistleblowers, journalist Paul Brodeur, who just passed, actually, Louis kind of wrote this timeline of his work and what happened, how he was shut down by the military, by the government, all these things. And he was the guy who pioneered, that asbestos is bad for us, right? Mm-hmm. Which was totally accepted. And at the same time, he's calling out these concerns with extremely low frequency, like 60 hertz stuff, and then high frequency microwave stuff. And people just laughed at him, right? So bizarre, but it's on Microwave News. It's a great read, a lot of good links. And your earlier point about like Apple or tech companies, like Steve Jobs, right? He got this super rare form pancreatic cancer.
Super rare, yeah. It was
Where was he always wearing his cell phone, and his little belt pouch, right? Right up in there by the pancreas. It's like, hello, come on, guys.
Yeah, he was thin.
This charismatic guy.
So it wasn't necessarily insulin, or it's unlikely to have been some sort of insulin dysregulation. Maybe he was pounding carbs and coffee all the time.
Well, but could the dysregulation on insulin have been caused by these non-native frequencies? And
I think that's more likely. It's not like he was, like this. He wasn't grossly obese or something. That is a clear sign of the pancreatic dysfunction.
Yep.
So, we've talked a lot about EMFs. I feel like we need to talk for like 20 hours or something, what they are and some of the issues. We've covered a lot to give people a holistic kind of summary feeling and understanding of this. But I know what I do to remediate a lot of these effects. What are some things that you do to kind of reclaim your health and wellness? You said that you were feeling this back when you were a firefighter because of all the frequencies and energies there.
Yeah.
What have you learned since then?
Yeah, so I do believe back in those days when I was working as a firefighter that I did become electrosensitive, right? Which is essentially this persistent inflammation in your body that manifests in you becoming really sensitive, getting a headache, getting an eye pain, brain fog around these things, right? And when I left that world, because I couldn't figure out what the hell was going on, and my performance was suffering, and it wasn't good for me, it wasn't good for my family, I got better. I started to heal. I was like, wow, okay, wait a minute. I got away from being up all night under these fluorescent lights and having a pager and a cell phone on my body in a high stress working environment. I got away from some of that and started to do better, right? And then what really, and I don't consider myself electrosensitive today. Like, I believe I have fully recovered. And the biggest piece of that was actually embracing natural EMFs, right? EMFs are not inherently bad. Like we talked about earlier, we've sort of harnessed certain chunks of them and turned up the power, turned up the coherence. But as you know, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners do, there's all these natural, healthy frequencies that all life has developed under. So for me, learning about and adhering to a proper circadian rhythm and not breaking that with technology, with light, artificial light, which we haven't really jumped on, but that's also a part of this.
Blue light.
EMF. Yes, absolutely. Artificial lighting does not equal sunlight, right? And we can also make it as bright as solar noon in the middle of the night if we want to. So getting in that rhythm, getting aligned with the light and dark cycle, being up when the sun comes out, being outside to see it without glasses, with skin exposed, grounding on the earth during those times, being out in the natural frequencies, as much as possible throughout the day is still incredibly powerful. Those frequencies, those signals, that's the wireless download that we really need, right? That's the software packet that we really need. And I've learned that if you don't pay attention to that, if you don't embrace the natural stuff, if you just remediate your home and get all the Wi-Fi out and do all these things, it's not enough. You have to connect to nature. You have to connect to Mother Nature. So that was the biggest piece in taking me over the top on recovery. And it's something that's tough with my clients, getting them to understand you have to be outside. We have become an indoor society. I saw a study yesterday. The EPA was looking at various environmental problems inside homes and offices and cars. And they had estimated that we spend 93% of our time now inside of a building, a car, a home, right? Not connected to nature. So you have to do both sides of the coin. That's the biggest thing I've learned, the biggest catalyst in me regaining my health and wellness.
It speaks back to how something like ionizing, non-ionizing radiation, you have these molecular bond breaks, these ion flows, but it speaks to how one of the big effects is your biorhythms and your circadian rhythms are so important. And these natural electromagnetic fields are what govern those. So for example, during a geomagnetic storm, your heart rhythms go crazy and there's a higher risk of heart attack and arrhythmias and all these issues, cardiovascular events during a geomagnetic storm. And that is energy flux way up there, 1,000 kilometers up, 500 kilometers up in the atmosphere. You're having these energy flows out in the plastosphere, beyond the orbit of the moon and all this. It's a whole different realm of energy that I talk about on my channel. I also talk about the specifics for earthing and grounding for anyone that wants to dig into this more. But that can influence your heart rhythms through these fields that do go from there all the way to here and connect with us. And of course, the heart, you lose your heart signal, you're dead. That's it. You don't keep going if your heart stops beating. And so it speaks to like the idea of rhythm and resonance and coherence, and how that's really the grander picture that we're painting here. It's that, what is your electromagnetic environment? What is its composition and its makeup? You can imagine like a painting or a tapestry. What are the colors? What's the thickness of the threads? What's the texture? What's it made out of? And a lot of people, I think, if they had their environment put into like a tapestry, it would not look good. They'd be like, whoa, I've been sitting in this chair. My armchair is next to one of these electromagnetic clouds because the wiring behind that part of the wall is broken. Whereas if I was just to sit over there, it'd be much better. Or like even to, like a small thing like that can make such a difference. But the bigger picture is, what is your tapestry? And when you go outside away from these things, the tapestry is radically different. You can start to tap into these different like experiences of reality and consciousness. For example, in Ukrainian Carpathian Mountains at Dinspace, this is where I just was. It was basically, except for that one cell tower there, it was all natural energies. And I was grounding all the time, so the Schumann resonances were strong. We had these thunderstorms roll through at times. And I felt very clean. My sleep was great. My sleep has taken a hit now that I'm back in the city. Absolutely. So I'm working to remediate that. And I did a building. I didn't spend any time in the building. I had a tent, which is a thin little, piece of nylon. And then there was the outdoor area. So I maybe spent 0.01% of my time in the building when I was there for like a month.
Nice.
And just like the change of temperature influences your circadian rhythm. That's a very big one for sleep. People don't realize. The light cycle. And so these rhythms are really important. And it's like, are you in resonance with the earth, or are you fighting to find resonance where there is none, which would be these artificial fields? There is no resonance. They're just delivering data packets, which are random. It's not like you're receiving a text message every 60 seconds consistently, right? Or it's the power grid, which is just constantly just providing energy to all your devices. But the Earth has its natural diurnal rhythms because the Earth rotates on its axis. Every 24 hours, that sun says, hello, I'm here. And then there's the lunar rhythm, which is 28 days. And that also influences us bioelectrically. It has its own lunar telluric currents it creates in the Earth's surface. And we could go into all this. But these natural rhythms, it's like the idea of resonance. Resonance is what's driving these cellular and molecular actions in our body. And it's also what's helping us to guide our consciousness. If you have clean heart rhythms, then you can have clean, positive emotions and feel good. And you can start to have these more kind of like higher consciousness moments. And then you have like the same resonant interactions that happen in our body are also what we connect to at a large scale. And it's just, that's the larger framework that's at play here. And we're creating environments that just aren't resonant for us. They're not harmonious for us. We didn't evolve to them. And it's like almost, if we keep at this, I really hope that we find a solution to this. That's why we're having this conversation, to bring some awareness to this and provide people solutions. Because I think changing your environment really is one of the key ways to improve this. But that's a difficult lifestyle change for many. So start small. What's a way you can start small with this?
I would tell everyone to switch their home network to a hardlined system.
So
Ethernet cables, right? I've written a detailed article on my site on everything you need to know.
I'll put a link below.
Yeah, awesome. This is just the low-hanging fruit. Ethernet is significantly faster than wireless. It's less hackable. It's biologically much better for us. It's just a no-brainer, and it's really DIY. You don't have to be some kind of tech genius to pull it off. Like if you read this article, get the stuff you need, you can take action on it. And the wireless, like I said earlier, is the biggest piece. So that's the place to start. The second place is going to be your light environment, right? Our artificial bulbs, our screens, the readout on your oven are all emitting an alien spectrum. They flicker imperceptibly. Turn all your lights on, put your laptop right there, stand back, take a slow motion video with your phone, play it back. You'll see what I'm talking about. The sun does not do that, right? It is an alien signal. So controlling your light, essentially to open windows during the day, to only use like candles or orange/red incandescent bulbs at night.
Low Kelvin temperatures.
Low, warm, and low light intensity as well. Even a very bright red light at night can disrupt melatonin. Not as much as blue, but you need to follow the sun, right? When the sun's not up, you shouldn't have any light. Maybe a candle, a little red battery-powered flashlight. When the sun is up during the day, you want that bright signal. You want bright days, dark nights. As you get closer to sunset, and this is hard for a lot of people, right? They've worked all day, they've done their thing, they've run the kids around to school or wherever. They come home, they just want to unwind. They want to watch some Netflix, watch a YouTube video.
Hopefully this one.
Hopefully this one, yeah. But you're blasting yourself with an alien spectrum, and you're preventing the onset of melatonin, which is built up through morning sunlight. It will not release until it hasn't seen light, bright light, for 2 to 4 hours. So if you're watching Netflix or scrolling on your phone right up until you go to bed, you have significantly decreased the time that melatonin will have to work while you sleep.
Oh no, don't tell me this, because right now it is like, like 9:30 or 10 p.m. where I am? And
I know, brother.
Doing this
we need to get you some blue blockers. We need to get you some blue blockers.
I had some and I lost them. But yes, I do need to buy a new pair. But I want people to be clear. I know what I'm, putting myself through right now as a one-off for the sake of this conversation. So it's not like I'm doing this totally ignoramus.
Yeah, if people are like you said, we don't want to just be doom and gloom or anxiety provoking here. There are practical, easily attainable things you can do to improve your environment. And you start with the wireless, and then you focus on light. And while you're doing that, whatever you need to do, set reminders on your phone, put your laptop outside, but get your ass outside. Those natural frequencies are super powerful in offsetting the man-made stuff.
So I guess to kind of create a scale, the first thing would be not to have any devices near you when you sleep, different room, airplane mode when you're not using them actively. So if you're walking around, airplane mode, turn it off if that also works for you. And ultra basic would be to turn your Wi-Fi off at night. But better, and where you should start, would be with an Ethernet wiring, which you have the article on. I'll put the link below. And then to improve your light environment, to help you improve your circadian signaling, because visible light is one of the dominant ways our circadian rhythm, as you talked about, is governed and guided. And then going outside, and if you want to give yourself a challenge, putting bare feet on grass every day, or bare feet on ground every day, I think would be another relatively easy introductory thing you could do to start improving this dramatically. And the nice thing about this whole balance of like, okay, well, this is good, but this is bad. How they balance each other out. Like, oh, at the fire district, I've been working out and eating all, good food, but then that crept up. The nice
Hmm.
thing is that if you do these basics, you'll get a huge headwind, or not headwind, tailwind. All of a sudden, be like, whoa, like I feel great. And now you have this like surplus of energy and motivation to then click into rest really quickly. That's been
Yeah.
my experience. So get those easy wins that do a lot, build those habits. And then from there, there's the more advanced techniques that, you can learn about, like in my book, which will be the Power Guide. It's either pre-order or you can purchase it depending on when you watch this in the video description. Your website's chock full of information. You go there. And in general, I have a lot of videos on earthing and grounding. But yeah, a lot of people get kind of brought into this whirlpool of like, oh, well, use a grounding product. And they spend like $200 on it. Here's the problem is they spend like so much money on these grounding products that
Hmm.
then often make things worse and just leaves a sour taste in their mouth. So I would say watch this video before you like try any sort of earthing product and really focus on these more comprehensive, holistic wellness practices and measures that you can take that have proven themselves, um, at least for the two of us. So,
Yeah, absolutely. No, and it's very low cost to get outside, to get yourself connected to Mother Nature, right? It's very low cost. Um, yeah.
one beautiful thing to think about is you go into a forest. And when I was in Bulgaria, I went caving. We saw tree roots down at like 55 meters.
Wow.
And the world record is like with a fig tree down to like 100 meters or something. But I was like, how deep are we? I was talking to our guide. He's like, yeah, we're like 55 meters right now. There's just roots hanging everywhere. I'm like,
Wow.
holy, these are not like, well, I mean, they are special trees, clearly, but they were not fig trees. This was just the forest up above, and they slowly worked their way all the way down. And the point of me saying that is that there are these electric currents that run through Earth's surface, telluric currents. The deeper you go, the stronger they get. And of course, anything that contains water and salts, like your body or like the vascular system of a plant, is highly, highly conductive. So they are bringing these natural energy fields up. And you can visualize how a force containing all these trees will radiate and turn these natural telluric currents into magnetic fields, creating like this aura. And if you walk into a forest, not only is it pleasing in terms of how it looks and it sounds, and it's quiet and there's not as many artificial EMFs because they're just not there, but you're also immersing yourself in this natural bio like aura that is incredibly healing and powerful in so many ways. And it's it's just
Mhm.
so beautiful learning about this stuff because while you learn how some of these technologies and energies can detract from health, you also are empowered at the same time. Like, I have the answer and the solution as well. I don't have to sit here and stay stuck in this like environment and just put all my chips on this grounding mat. I can go out and immerse myself in this magic like tree aura field that's created. And I mean, that's like
Yeah.
basic physics that explains that. That's not any sort of woo woo or anything. Like, that is simple, the laws of electromagnetism as like derived and figured out by Maxwell and some of the early physicists from like the late 1800s. So it's
Mhm.
not any big stretch. It's just a question of knowing it, and can you like see it in your mind, and then can you feel it? It's very subtle. These are subtle energies, and it requires practice and time. So the key is to do it consistently.
Mhm.
Do that consistently until one day you have that aha moment, until you feel it, and then all of a sudden it clicks. That's been my experience.
For sure. Yeah, and dopamine is this super powerful part of your body, that links to motivation and vision. And we know that so much of this tech, social media, this artificial light, it robs us of dopamine. We lose our vision, we lose our motivation. So to your point, you start chipping away at this, you're going to build that back up. You're going to start to get the vision, you know, you're going to get stronger, more intuitive. You're going to have more resilience. You'll be surprised if you're kind of living that indoor lifestyle now, tech addiction, you start breaking pieces of that off. It's going to accelerate for you quickly in a positive way. And just to clarify, I think while people are kind of digesting the Ethernet article, maybe ordering the components, doing all that, your point about turning everything wireless off at night, that's start there while you're figuring the Ethernet stuff out. That's so easy. Just unplug everything. Get a simple $4 wall timer that your Wi-Fi plugs into, right? That just automatically goes off at 10 o'clock or whatever. Just make sure all that stuff, and not just the Wi-Fi. What kind of smart stuff do you have, right? What, you know, is your laptop powered down? Make sure all that's off at night. That's pretty easy. That's the easiest place to start. A word about cell phones and airplane mode.
Yes, please.
Your phone can trick you. Okay. It has multiple antennas, right? The cellular one, the Wi-Fi, the Bluetooth. It also has a near field chip for like payments, things like that. It has a GPS antenna. If you have an iPhone, it has what's called the Find My app. In case you lose your phone somewhere, you can pull it up on your laptop and see where it is. So if you put your phone in airplane mode, that is still sending out radiation constantly, sending out that SOS signal in case you need to find your phone, right? So your phone can definitely trick you. I would encourage people, I built this, it's kind of an app, not really an app, but kind of like an app that they can get on my store for their iPhone, which essentially, instead of having to click 5, 6, 7 times to turn all these things off, because sometimes if you hit airplane mode, your Bluetooth or your Wi-Fi can still be on, right? So it, at the click of a button, those all go off. And it is also aligned with the sunrise and the sunset. And at sunset, it will change your screen to red. It'll get that blue out of it, and it'll turn the brightness down. And then when sunrise comes, it'll automatically turn back on. So it just is super convenient into managing our phones. It also has in the instructions that come with it, steps on turning location services off, turning the Find My thing off, to really make your phone clean. But we just need to be careful. Airplane mode isn't always airplane mode. So if you want the easy button on this, check out on my store, that little app thing. But otherwise, get the tech out of the bedroom. Don't use that as an alarm clock. You know, get a little red battery powered thing off Amazon if you need an alarm clock. But it's a slippery slope keeping that cell phone by you at night. So I wouldn't recommend it.
And I'll put a link to your app in the video description. And that's why I think going outside and pursuing that angle is so much more powerful, because there's like ever increasing layers of nuance that you can fiddle with when it comes to these things. So it's like, okay, well, I can turn the Wi-Fi router off and I can do airplane mode. That's good. I can do this Ethernet conversion. Hey, that's good too. I'm not saying don't do that. But then you can go down this rabbit hole and never address, like you said, never address the other component. And you don't have to worry about an Ethernet kit or something if you just actually aren't even in the house. You can't use Ethernet in the house. You leave your phone, go on a hike. Like the more you split your time, every 24 hours is what you're given. And what is your imprint that 24 hours? Was it filled with good things, bad things? Just what was your makeup? And if you can start to shift the balance and put more chips in this area and take less chips, take them away from there.
Yeah.
That over time is so, so, so powerful. And so it's, yes, focus on this stuff, but don't get lost in it. It's like this idea of you can take a supplement to fix everything. They can be useful. They can be good. Let's be smart and utilize everything to our advantage, but don't let that be your new puppet master. And really like going and taking control, saying, I don't like how, let's say you don't feel well, right? Let's say you've noticed this stuff yourself. Like, I don't have to be here. I know that if I go outside to the park and put my feet on the grass and lay down a bit, or maybe I just do some simple stretching or yoga or just breathing exercises, pump your air, like your lungs with good oxygen, I will feel better. I can be in the house and do all this stuff for 3 hours and not get a meaningful improvement in how I'm feeling with my nausea or fatigue or headache, some of these electro symptoms, versus if I just do this state change in 5, 10, 30 minutes, I know I will feel dramatically better. I would say one of the most powerful ways you can practice earthing and grounding is to go swimming in the ocean. So if someone really needs to like trigger like and start a deep healing process, that is the way, because the ocean's highly conductive because of all the dissolved salts. So all the natural telluric currents of the earth are flowing through the top 100 meters of the ocean. And then they decrease in strength the lower you go because it becomes more and more resistive and it's just further down. But you effectively are really exposing yourself to the natural EMFs very strongly. And you can quickly get aligned to those rhythms when you go. And that's why it feels so good after you go to the beach. You sunbathe a little bit, you're in the water, you're having fun, dopamine, all that stuff. And one thing about dopamine too, I want to mention, is that's a very unstable molecule. There's like 7 different forms, something like that. There's a lot of different subforms of dopamine. But one of the reasons it can connect to all these different receptors that exist is because it's fairly fluid. It has an ability to kind of, it's also like testosterone is another one. These hormones themselves are kind of unstable to begin with. So if you have an inflammatory environment, you have all these ions flying around from these non-thermal, non-ionizing mechanisms, connect, boom, testosterone goes away. Hey, look at male testosterone levels for the past like 100 years, 80 years, 70 years. They've just been plummeting, right? Dopamine. You're just like, your brain finds like, hey, here's some dopamine, enjoy it. And then all of a sudden it gets free radicalized because you have all this junk flying around in your body. Yeah. So it's like all connected. And that's why it's like, just do this thing and it solves almost everything else. And that's what's so great about that. But some people are like afraid of, I don't know. I love the park. I like going outside. I'm an Eagle Scout, Boy Scout. So I guess that's always been me.
Change is scary. If you don't know, you may have some anxiety around it. Just got to make that first step or two. I think there's a lot for different people to key in on here and start digging in. So it'd be cool to see what kind of feedback and comments you get, and maybe we could tailor a second round or something and get into some of the topics that are most popular.
Great idea. So we will do another podcast, and so if you have questions you want answered, leave them below. We'll have probably some sort of Q&A session, but also anything you want us to dive into more specifically, other things to talk about, leave that all below, and we'll let the community guide kind of the direction of the next podcast that we have. Because I think we've talked for hours and hours and hours, but we have pretty comprehensively talked about this stuff from a independent standpoint too. Like, I have a YouTube channel, but sometimes I make like $10 a day from it. So it's not money bags for me, making this stuff yet. I'm not selling $200 grounding products, nor am I the CEO of Apple. So You have your small business. I hope that's been very successful. If you would like to work with Shane and you're in Oregon, Washington, any other states?
Yeah, you know what? I'll really go anywhere that someone has a need. There's not a ton of building biologists like me, so you may not have one in your area. So I'm happy to chat with anybody about their concerns wherever they're at. I've done remote consulting with people,
Perfect.
South Africa, Europe, all over North America. So yeah, I mean, I'm based out of Oregon, so I primarily am kind of West Coast guy, but this is important work. It needs to get out there. People need help with it. So I'm happy to go where the need is.
And if you have the need, the want, the desire to learn more from Shane himself, you can go to his website, optimaldwellingspaces.com. That's in the video description. Again, I have bunches of content on this stuff. So if you're new here, you can begin by going to my earthing grounding playlist. If you want to learn more about some of these things that really affect us deeply, like water and the quantum dynamic properties of water, that's in like my podcast. This is a one-stop shop, folks. So I really hope that you've A, found this video, B, you're still here, and C, you have been given kind of a holistic understanding to launch you into how you can really use this, because we're touching the base of biology here in many ways. Diet is important. Sleep is very important. Fresh, clean air, the people that you surround yourself with. These are all incredibly important things. But when we're talking about electromagnetism, this is a fundamental force of nature. And so everything is in many ways built on top of that.
Yes.
So this is kind of getting to the heart of these things. And that's why it can be one of the most powerful healing modalities known to improve your electromagnetic environment. That's why some people call grounding like the most important health discovery ever. But as we discussed in this video, there's a lot of nuance there. It's very important to know what's good, what's not, and how some of these common grounding techniques may actually be setting you further back than you originally were. So
that's right. Yeah.
I'm glad that you joined in to help kind of dispel some of these myths floating around. And if you'd like to see more of Shane and what he does, you can subscribe to his channel, subscribe to mine. We'll do another podcast, folks. And thank you so much for watching. And Shane, thank you so much for joining in today. And wishing you the best with your business, and all those resources are in the video description.
Thank you, Stefan. It's been great.
Farewell, folks. Namaste.